Welcome to the edge of the galaxy, where survival is measured in seconds and trust can cost you everything. Tonight's story begins with a stolen quantum drive, a relentless alien hunter, and a jump that tears open reality itself. What follows is not just a chase through collapsing stars and shifting gravity, but a fight to decide who you become when death is certain. Strap in and listen closely. The void is already closing in. Alarms shrieked through the narrow spine of the Star Reaver as Kael Voss slammed the stolen quantum drive into its housing cradle. Warning glyphs flared crimson across the cockpit canopy. Behind him, space ignited with weapons fire, the sleek silhouette of the Night Talon slicing through debris with predatory precision. Shields buckled under the first impact. Kael's pulse thundered in his ears as he overrode 3 safety locks and forced power into the unstable core. The drive answered with a low, bone-deep vibration that made the hull tremble. Another blast tore past the viewport, close enough to scorch plating. He didn't look back. Throttle forward. Engines screamed. Stars elongated into violent streaks as space-time began to distort. The Night Talon held formation, relentless. Kael exhaled once, steady and defiant, then triggered the quantum ignition, knowing this jump would either save him or erase them both from existence entirely. Silence hit first, then gravity twisted. The Star Reaver lurched violently as the distortion collapsed inward, hurling Kael against his restraints. Warning tones flickered, then died. Outside the canopy, the stars no longer formed constellations, only scattered fractures of distant light. Dominating everything was a colossal black hole, its accretion disk burning like a torn halo, bending space into a slow, devouring spiral. Power levels dropped to emergency reserves. Navigation arrays returned nothing. No recognized stellar signatures. No Federation markers. He tried the comms. Static. Long-range scan revealed one familiar anomaly. The Night Talon, drifting several thousand kilometers off his starboard side. Equally silent. The quantum drive core pulsed faintly, unstable but intact. Radiation spikes rippled across the hull plating. Kael steadied his breathing, fingers moving automatically across the console, rerouting power to life support. They hadn't escaped. They had fallen somewhere beyond maps, beyond rescue, into a sector that did not want them alive. The planetoid surface cracked beneath the Star Reaver's landing struts, dust spiraling into thin gravity. Kael stepped onto the rock with a scanner in one hand and his blaster in the other. Radiation readings fluctuated, but held below lethal thresholds. For now. Across the barren plain. The Night Talon settled with feline grace, its hatch hissed open. Lyra emerged, blue skin reflecting the cold light of the distant black hole. Golden eyes locked on him. No weapons drawn, but none holstered either. The air between them felt sharper than vacuum. Neither ship could survive alone. Both were crippled. Oxygen cycles were limited. Power cores unstable. The black hole's pull increasing by fractional increments. Kael broke the silence first. Voice steady. Repairs. Shared scans. Temporary ceasefire. Lyra studied him for a long second, then gave a single nod. Survival demanded compromise. Trust was unnecessary. Cooperation was not. The first tremor rolled through the planetoid like distant thunder. Kael looked up as 3 descending heat signatures pierced the thin atmosphere, engines burning white against the void. Pirate craft, low orbit, aggressive vector. Lyra was already moving, snapping her blaster into her palm. Dropship slammed onto the cracked surface, kicking up choking plumes of dust and ionized grit. Hatches burst open. Figures poured out, armored, mismatched, heavily armed. No negotiation signals, no scanning delay. They came shooting. Plasma bolts scorched the ground where Kael had stood a heartbeat earlier. He dove behind a fractured rock shelf, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. Lyra moved like flowing metal, precision and violence intertwined, cutting down the lead attacker before the rest adjusted. More shapes emerged from the dropships. Too many. The air shimmered with weapons discharge and dust. Cooperation was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, lethal, and necessary. Blaster fire stitched molten lines across the hull of the Star Reaver as Kael sprinted up the boarding ramp. Lyra covering him with ruthless precision. Pirate reinforcements fanned out, heavy weapons deploying. The air shimmered with plasma discharge. The ship's systems flickered weakly as Kael slammed into the pilot's seat, fingers flying across failing controls. Power reserves were barely above critical. Shields were gone, atmospheric integrity dropping. Lyra vaulted through the hatch seconds before another explosion rocked the landing struts. "Now!" she snapped. Kael rerouted emergency power directly into the quantum drive core, ignoring stability warnings cascading across the console. The drive pulsed erratically, harmonics spiking into dangerous thresholds. The pirates' dropships lifted. Locking target. Too late. Kael forced ignition. Space convulsed. The surface below twisted into smeared light as gravity collapsed inward, ripping the Star Reaver violently out of orbit and into another unpredictable tear in reality. The jump spat them into orbit around a swollen red giant, its surface boiling in violent convection storms. The Star Reaver drifted, hull scorched and systems flickering at half capacity. Kael killed main thrust and focused on damage control, hands steady despite the tremor still humming in his bones. Lyra moved beside him without instruction, sealing ruptured conduits, recalibrating sensor arrays, her precision as sharp as during combat. No accusation, no threat, only efficiency. Oxygen stabilized. Core temperature dropped within survivable range. Through the viewport, the dying star pulsed like a warning heartbeat. They had escaped annihilation by seconds. Kael glanced at Lyra. She met his gaze briefly, neither smiling nor softening, but something unspoken settled between them. They had chosen to fight together instead of alone. Survival had burned away rivalry. What remained was something more dangerous than distrust: dependence. The warning came as a whisper in the static. Kael leaned over the console as encrypted fragments slipped through damaged receivers, burst transmissions, layered and masked. Lyra decoded them in seconds, her expression hardening. Crimson Syndicate identifiers, multiple signatures, fleet-class tonnage. The red giant's radiation storms had concealed them until now, on long-range scan. Distortions shimmered at the system's edge, massive vessels exiting hyperspace in coordinated formation. Not pirates, professionals. Their vector triangulated directly toward the Star Reaver. Kael's jaw tightened. The quantum drive core pulsed faintly behind the bulkhead, as if aware it was being hunted. The Syndicate did not pursue without purpose. They eradicated obstacles. Lyra rerouted power to stealth plating, but the ship's emissions were bleeding across the spectrum. Engines at minimal output would buy minutes at best. Across the tactical display, red markers multiplied. The hunt had escalated. Kael fired the engines. skimming dangerously close to the red giant's outer plasma streams, hoping radiation interference would blur their signature. It bought seconds. Syndicate cruisers shifted formation with chilling precision, cutting off vector after vector. Hyperspace corridors collapsed on the nav screen, sealed by interdiction fields. They were hurting him. Lyra recalculated escape routes in silence, but each projection ended the same: containment. A carrier-class vessel dropped ahead of them, its hull bristling with weapon arrays, blocking the only clear trajectory out system. The Star Reaver's power grid flickered under strain. Shields were gone, armor integrity questionable. Kael exhaled once, steadying himself. If they stayed, they would be boarded. If they jumped blind, the damaged drive might tear them apart. The red markers tightened in a lethal arc. Space itself felt smaller, suffocating. They were not outrunning this fleet. Kael locked onto the only unstable anomaly left on the scanner, a region of chaotic gravitational flux beyond mapped navigation. The Quantum Labyrinth. Lyra understood before he spoke. She tightened her harness as the Syndicate fleet closed, weapon capacitors flaring. "No margin for error," she said quietly. Kael pushed the engines to maximum burn. The Star Reaver shot toward the distortion field just as a volley of torpedoes detonated behind them. Space ahead shimmered like cracked glass. Then they crossed the threshold. Reality convulsed. Stars bent into impossible arcs. Phantom echoes of their ship flickered around them, delayed by fractured time. Hull plating groaned under tidal forces. Gravitational eddies slammed against them from multiple vectors. Behind them, the Syndicate warships plunged in pursuit, their larger mass granting brutal stability. The labyrinth swallowed them all. Escape was no longer distance. It was survival within chaos itself. Gravity struck from nowhere. The Star Reaver pitched violently as invisible forces sheared across the hull, metal screaming under stress. Kael fought the controls, compensating for vectors that defied physics. Outside the canopy, space folded inward like liquid glass, stars elongating, collapsing, reappearing in impossible angles. Phantom versions of their ship flickered ahead of them, seconds out of sync. Lyra braced at the console, rerouting power from non-essential systems to structural integrity fields. A gravitic surge slammed into them broadside, hurling loose equipment across the cockpit. Warning glyphs cascaded red. Hull strain exceeding tolerances. Radiation spikes followed, threading through compromised shielding. The quantum drive core began to resonate in response to the labyrinth's distortions, its harmonic frequency climbing into dangerous ranges. The Syndicate cruisers emerged behind them, battered but intact. The labyrinth did not favor the small or the fast. It favored nothing at all. A shadow took shape through the distortion ahead, too symmetrical to be natural. As the Star Reaver cleared a violent gravitational swell, the structure emerged fully, an immense lattice of interlocked spheres and pylons orbiting a central vortex of white-blue energy. It did not drift. It anchored the chaos around it. The quantum drive thrummed in answer, its resonance spiking in harmonic alignment. Lyra's scans flickered with data overload, ancient signatures older than Federation records. Energy conduits pulsed along the structure's spine, channeling raw space-time flux into the swirling core. The labyrinth's turbulence intensified near it, bending trajectories into controlled spirals. Syndicate cruisers adjusted formation, recognizing opportunity. Kael felt it before the instruments confirmed. This was no ruin. It was active. The Nexus was not debris of lost civilization. It was the engine at the heart of the storm. and they had flown straight into its gravity well. The Syndicate fleet tightened its formation, heavy cruisers spreading into a containment arc around the Nexus. Interdiction fields ignited, warping the surrounding distortion into a cage of warped gravity. Kael tried to plot a vector out, but every trajectory looped back toward the central vortex. The labyrinth's currents dragged at the Star Reaver, nudging it closer to the Nexus like a slow, inevitable tide. Weapons locks pinged across the console, multiple signatures, synchronized. Lyra diverted remaining power to maneuvering thrusters, but the ship responded sluggishly. Battered by tidal shear, a cruiser surged forward, its hull plating absorbing the labyrinth's chaos with brutal stability. They were cornered between ancient machinery and modern firepower. No clear jump window, no stealth path. Radiation climbed. Structural integrity dipped again. Kael exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the impossible. There would be no outrunning this. Only consequence. Kael watched the tactical display as the Syndicate formation narrowed, every cruiser calculating the same inevitable capture. The Nexus pulsed beyond the canopy, its energy vortex feeding on gravitational distortion. The quantum drive hummed in unstable resonance, harmonics climbing toward catastrophic thresholds. A realization formed with cold clarity. If the drive synchronized fully with the Nexus core, the resulting feedback would cascade through the labyrinth. Not a jump, a detonation. Enough to shatter interdiction fields and tear apart ships caught within range. It would also obliterate the Star Reaver. Kael's hands hovered over the manual override panel, steady despite the tremor in the deck. Lyra saw the calculation in his eyes before he spoke. There was only one workable option. Someone had to extract the drive core. Someone had to remain behind to overload the system. Survival now meant choosing who lived. Lyra moved without protest, though her eyes burned with something unspoken. She crossed to the quantum drive housing and initiated manual extraction protocols. The core disengaged with a violent shudder, conduits snapping free in arcs of blue light. Warning sirens intensified as power stability plummeted. Kael locked the ship's trajectory toward the Nexus, forcing the engines to hold against mounting gravitational pull. Outside, Syndicate cruisers adjusted formation, unaware of the trap forming at the heart of chaos. Lyra secured the drive core inside a containment field pack and sprinted toward the emergency pod bay. The deck tilted sharply as another gravitic surge struck. She paused only once at the hatch threshold, golden eyes meeting his across the flickering cockpit. No farewell, no hesitation. The pod launched seconds later, swallowed instantly by distortion. Kael remained alone at the controls, hands steady on the inevitable. Kael initiated the overload sequence, the cockpit filled with cascading warnings as the exposed quantum matrix began drawing raw flux from the Nexus vortex. Hull plating buckled under mounting stress. Syndicate cruisers surged forward, weapons charging, finally recognizing the anomaly spike. Too late. The Star Reaver accelerated directly toward the core, engines screaming against gravitational collapse. Radiation flooded the interior, searing through compromised shielding. Kael locked the controls and removed his hands, watching the vortex swell across the viewport. Interdiction fields warped and fractured as harmonic feedback rippled outward. The first cruiser ruptured under tidal shear, its hull twisting like molten metal. Then light consumed everything. The detonation tore through the labyrinth in a silent eruption, folding space inward before blasting outward in a violent temporal shockwave. For an instant, Kael felt himself unravel, atom by atom, before the universe went white. The shockwave did not explode outward in fire. It rippled through time. A silent distortion expanded from the Nexus, bending light and gravity into a rolling wall of warped reality. Syndicate cruisers caught within its radius fractured mid-maneuver, their hulls elongating into thin, luminous strands before snapping apart. Others vanished entirely, swallowed into spiraling rifts that blinked open and shut like wounds. The labyrinth convulsed, gravitational eddies reversing direction, temporal currents surging in chaotic spirals. Across the void, escape pods and debris scattered in unpredictable arcs. Sensors aboard distant ships later recorded impossible readings, vessels appearing decades ahead of themselves, then collapsing back into present coordinates. The Nexus core imploded under its own feedback, its luminous vortex compressing into a point of blinding intensity before collapsing into nothing. Silence returned slowly, like breath after drowning. The battlefield no longer existed. Only fragments remained. Emergency beacons flickered weakly across scattered debris fields as surviving Syndicate vessels attempted fragmented communication. Long-range relays transmitted distorted telemetry back toward core systems. Catastrophic energy surge. Fleet fragmentation. Quantum source destroyed. Among the final bursts of corrupted data, the Star Reaver's signature vanished completely. No escape pod trace, no debris cluster consistent with survivable ejection. The Crimson Syndicate's central network archived the event as total loss. Kael Voss, deceased. Lyra, deceased. Quantum drive, eliminated. Official reports labeled the Labyrinth incident an anomaly collapse, a navigational hazard too unstable for further incursion. Recovery operations were deemed financially impractical. Within days, the sector was marked restricted and abandoned in distant systems. Rumors spread of ships torn from time itself, but without proof. Stories faded in the vacuum where their names once circulated. Silence settled. The galaxy moved on, convinced the void had claimed them both. Kael did not experience the explosion as death. He experienced it as unraveling. The temporal shockwave caught his collapsing ship and folded him into its expanding crest, suspending him inside a corridor of fractured seconds. Time fractured into overlapping layers, echoes of himself flickering ahead and behind, each version dissolving before contact. His body disintegrated at the molecular threshold, then reassembled under forces beyond comprehension. Sensory input vanished, replaced by weightless silence. When gravity returned, it did so violently. Kael slammed onto cold metal plating, air flooding painfully into his lungs. Emergency lights strobed across an unfamiliar medical chamber. Automated monitors registered a pulse that should not have existed. Outside the viewport, stars drifted calmly, unaware of the chaos that had birthed him. 3 weeks had passed. The labyrinth was gone, against probability, against physics. He had survived time itself. White light stabbed into Kael's eyes as consciousness forced its way back. The scent of sterilized air filled his lungs, sharp and metallic. Restraint bands loosened automatically as biometric scanners recalibrated around him. Monitors hummed in steady rhythm, projecting vital signs that fluctuated beyond normal human tolerance. His muscles trembled under the weight of gravity, unfamiliar and heavy. A transparent med field shimmered above his chest, knitting microfractures along bone and tissue. He tried to sit up. Pain surged like electricity through his ribs. Beyond the edge of his blurred vision stood a blue silhouette, motionless, watching. Lyra stepped closer, golden eyes reflecting the medical display's glow. No accusation, no triumph, only guarded relief. Outside the bay viewport, a quiet star field stretched undisturbed. No labyrinth, no nexus, just ordinary space. Kael swallowed hard, realizing survival had delivered him somewhere entirely new and irreversible. Lyra activated the hollow display above his bed, projecting fragmented sensor logs recovered from the labyrinth. The detonation had not behaved like a conventional explosion. It generated a temporal surge that propagated outward in layered waves, distorting causality itself. Syndicate cruisers were scattered across distant systems and mismatched time indices. Some appeared days before they launched. Others never arrived at all. The Nexus collapsed completely, leaving no residual energy signature. Kael's biosignal, however, briefly reappeared inside the shockwave crest before vanishing from all known coordinates. 3 weeks later, he materialized in low orbit around an unclaimed medical outpost, unconscious but intact. Lyra's escape pod had been recovered by independent traders who assumed both ships destroyed. Official networks listed them dead. She studied him carefully. The galaxy believed their story finished. Only they knew the truth, that survival had rewritten them. Lyra dimmed the hollow display, letting silence settle between them. Outside the viewport, traffic lanes shimmered faintly in the distance, civilian freighters, patrol routes, the slow rhythm of a galaxy that had already forgotten them. Kael flexed his hand, testing muscle strength, feeling the weight of a second chance press heavier than gravity. Official registries listed both their biosigns as terminated in the labyrinth collapse, accounts frozen, warrants void, bounties erased. For the first time, they were invisible. Lyra outlined the advantage with clinical precision. Anonymity was leverage. The Syndicate was fractured. Pirate routes destabilized. Power vacuums were forming along the outer rim. Kael understood. Survival had stripped them of past identities. They could rebuild without being hunted. Not fugitives. Not contract enforcers. Something else. The opportunity was not escape. It was reinvention. In death. They had gained freedom. Kael stood in the docking bay shadow as Lyra finalized forged transponder codes into a stripped-down freighter hull. The station registry identified it as salvage class. Unremarkable and beneath scrutiny. His old name no longer appeared in any active warrant database. Facial recognition nets returned null results. The galaxy believed he had disintegrated inside the labyrinth. Lyra's biometric tag had also been purged. Her bounty hunter credentials archived as deceased. They erased remaining traces with precision. Old ship logs wiped. Credit trails dissolved. Encrypted backups scattered across dead networks. Outside the hangar shields, the outer rim shimmered with unregulated trade routes and fractured territories. Power vacuums always attracted predators. Kael watched cargo containers lock into place, each stamped with false manifests. Death had severed pursuit. Now it would conceal intent. They would operate where records failed and jurisdiction dissolved. Ghosts moved more freely than fugitives ever could. The freighter cleared the station perimeter under a forged trade license, engines humming low and steady. Kael adjusted the flight path toward an unmonitored corridor known for slaver traffic and black market convoys. Lyra fed intercepted Syndicate chatter into the nav display, highlighting fractured territories left vulnerable after the labyrinth collapse. Without official contracts or bounties dictating their actions, decisions were theirs alone. That freedom carried weight. They selected targets based on threat, not profit, raiders preying on frontier colonies, traffickers exploiting broken routes. Kael felt the shift in purpose settle into muscle memory as he armed concealed weapon systems beneath cargo plating. Lyra calibrated long-range scanners, tracking heat signatures beyond commercial lanes. No flags, no affiliations, just intent. Survival had once been reaction. Now it became direction. They were no longer running from hunters. They were choosing where to strike next. The freighter slipped past the final regulated checkpoint and into the dark expanse beyond the Galactic Core's authority. Here. Star charts thinned, and patrol signals faded into static. Frontier systems pulsed faintly on long-range sensors, mining colonies, abandoned outposts, contested trade lanes. Kael adjusted their trajectory toward a sector flagged for repeated distress pings that had gone unanswered. No Federation response, no Syndicate presence, just silence where commerce once thrived. Lyra monitored subspace fluctuations, scanning for ambush signatures hidden within asteroid belts and derelict stations. The void felt wider here, less mapped, more honest in its dangers. This was not lawless space. It was unclaimed consequence. Kael felt no hesitation as the engines deepened to sustained burn. They were no longer drifting between factions. They were stepping deliberately into the frontier, where survival meant shaping the vacuum rather than hiding within it. A faint distress ping flickered through the freighter's comm array, buried beneath commercial static. Lyra isolated the signal and projected its source, an unregistered convoy moving without proper transponder identification. Heat signatures indicated reinforced cargo holds and weaponized escort drones. Kael adjusted course silently, throttling engines to shadow velocity. They approached through an asteroid veil, hull plating absorbing stray rock impacts, while passive scanners mapped the convoy's defensive grid. Lyra confirmed life signs within the central transport. Dozens. Confined. Restrained. No negotiation channels opened. Kael armed the concealed plasma cannons beneath false cargo panels. Timing mattered. One decisive strike before the escorts recalibrated. The freighter's disguise held until the last possible second. Then, Kael powered weapons to full output. The first escort drone erupted in flame, debris scattering across the convoy formation. The hunt had begun. Deliberate and unannounced. The convoy's wreckage drifted cold and silent as Kael transmitted anonymous coordinates to frontier patrol relays. Survivors were recovered within hours. The freighter vanished before authorities arrived. Weeks later, encrypted chatter across outlaw networks began referencing a pair of unidentified hunters striking without warning along unstable trade routes. No signatures, no demands, just precision attacks, followed by disappearances into uncharted corridors. Pirate clans tightened their formations. Slaver transports rerouted through longer, riskier paths. The Crimson Syndicate, still fractured from the Labyrinth collapse, attempted to trace the pattern, but found only ghost echoes in corrupted telemetry. Lyra monitored the data flow calmly, mapping fear across systems like constellations. Kael adjusted flight plans to avoid predictable cycles. Reputation did not require a name. It required consistency. In the vacuum beyond the core, rumors traveled faster than ships, and fear traveled faster than rumor. The freighter drifted in silent orbit above a dim frontier moon as Kael reviewed the aftermath logs. No civilian casualties. No collateral strikes beyond calculated tolerance. Lyra stood beside him, cross-checking sensor recordings to ensure every decision aligned with their chosen threshold. They were not executioners. They were not saviors. Targets were selected only after confirmed evidence of predation, verified slave manifests, intercepted ransom signals, encrypted black market contracts. Kael adjusted targeting protocols to disable rather than obliterate whenever containment allowed. Lyra updated engagement parameters to prioritize extraction corridors for captives before weapons discharge. The rules were unspoken at first, then codified. No unnecessary death, no pursuit beyond strategic objective, no profit taken from suffering. Survival had once demanded ruthlessness. Now it demanded discipline. In the quiet between missions, their code became the line separating them from the monsters they hunted. The freighter rested inside a forgotten docking ring carved into the side of an asteroid, hull scorched and patched from countless engagements. Kael stood before the external viewport, studying the thin line of scar tissue along his forearm, where temporal radiation had once torn through him. His body had healed, but the sensation of being unraveled by the labyrinth lingered like phantom gravity. Lyra approached without sound, her own armor marked by plasma scoring and impact fractures repaired, but never fully erased. They did not speak of the Nexus. They did not speak of death reports archived under their names. Survival had etched itself into muscle and memory. Outside, the frontier traffic lanes shimmered faintly against the void. Indifferent to their past, they were alive, not untouched, not unchanged, but intact. The cost of living had been paid in light and fracture. Kael remained at the viewport as docking clamps disengaged with a metallic thud. Ahead lay unregulated space. Fractured territories where law arrived too late, or not at all. Lyra stood beside him, reviewing incoming signals, distress beacons, encrypted alerts, fragmented whispers of instability. They did not have to answer any of them. No authority tracked their movements. No registry demanded accountability. The galaxy believed them dead, and anonymity offered freedom without obligation. That was the true crossroads. Kael powered the engine slowly, feeling the weight of deliberate action settle through the hull. Lyra rerouted sensors toward a cluster of frontier colonies requesting assistance against organized raiders. They could have vanished into deep space, survived quietly, untouched by consequence. Instead, Kael set a course toward conflict. Survival had given them choice. What they did next would define who they were. The freighter cleared the asteroid field and accelerated toward open dark, engines settling into a steady, restrained burn. Beyond the canopy, the galactic horizon stretched in layered bands of distant starlight, fractured trade routes, and unclaimed sectors pulsing with quiet instability. Kael adjusted course manually, bypassing established corridors and threading through blind zones only experienced pilots dared cross. Lyra monitored the long-range array, tracking subtle fluctuations that hinted at unrest ahead. They did not speak of destiny or redemption. There was only trajectory and intent. The void no longer felt like something to escape. It felt like terrain to navigate. Somewhere beyond the rim, predators hunted without opposition. Somewhere else, colonies waited for help that would never officially arrive. The freighter surged forward, small against the vastness, yet purposeful. They moved toward the horizon, not as ghosts, not as fugitives, but as chosen consequence. In the end, this was never just about escaping enemies or surviving impossible odds. It was about choice. When the universe strips away your past, your titles, your fear, what remains is who you decide to be. Kael and Lyra walked out of death not as fugitives, but as something forged in fire and consequence. If you felt the pull of that horizon, stay with us, like and subscribe. and join the next journey into the dark.